Hey guys, welcome back to Cruder.com. In this third video on logic formulas, we're going to solely be going over nested if statements. Let's jump right in and get started. Alright, we're back to this same data example. It's budget versus actual data. It's splitting it by department, so you have the executive all the way through the engineering department, and it's listing in summary at the beginning of the year what was the budgeted amount that that department was going to spend, what they actually spent, and then year to date, what's the variance to the budget. And then at the beginning of the year, they had a 10% tolerance to the budget, saying that they could either over or underspend by 10%, and that evaluates to $20,000. So using this data, let's go ahead and start writing some if statements. Now the first thing that kind of comes to mind when I start thinking about this table is I want to know if the department has overspent their budget. So we can easily write an if statement of saying, if the actual is greater than the budget, then they've overspent. So it's real basic and simple, so I'm just going to write it real quick. If the actual is greater than the budget, that means they overspent, right? They spent, in this case, a negative 10,000, meaning write all my variances, so if they're negative, it's a bad thing. If it's positive, it's a good thing. So overspending, that's usually bad. So I'm going to say yes, that's a bad thing. They did overspend, or no, that's a good thing. They did not overspend. And of course it turns out to say yes, they overspent. And with these answers, the yes, no, no, yes, 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 it all falls in line with the positive and negatives on this variance column right here. So we could have just said, hey, if the variance is positive, go ahead and say no. If it's negative, go ahead and say yes. But the next thing I want to go ahead and kind of look at is, well, in this formula, I want to start looking at the nesting of if statements. I want to make my formulas more complicated, more complex, so they can give me better, faster answers. Because just telling me that it's a yes or a no, I mean, I can obviously see that it's a bad variance by the negative right here. So instead of just saying yes, I want to replace this yes, because if that is true, I want to ask one more question. I want to ask, hey, if it's true, then did they overspend more than the tolerance amount that I have here? And so I'm going to put in another if statement. This is called nesting the if statements. So we're going to take if the absolute value of this variance, and just so you remember, if you're not familiar with absolute values, an absolute value just goes ahead and turns a negative to a positive, and if it's already positive, it stays positive. So this will evaluate as $10,000. Now if that number, $10,000, is greater than the tolerance amount, then we've definitely overspent by too much. So I'm going to say, if that's true, I'm going to say overspent. If not, I'm going to say that we're okay. And I'm going to close that parentheses. It's going to go to the next piece and evaluate. That is a no, which is at the very beginning of this if statement. So I'm going to hit enter. You're going to see it says okay. And let's see what the rest of them say. So this one's okay, meaning they've overspent, but they didn't overspend by the tolerance amount. They were within it. The next two go ahead and say, hey, they didn't overspend at all. They actually underspent, which is fine. The last three, they overspent, and then they overspent even past the variance or the tolerance amount that we have here. Now let's go ahead and dissect this formula a little bit closer. So let me delete these to get them out of the way. As you can see that we have two if statements in here, so we are nesting the if statements, but I kind of want to just show you exactly how Excel is evaluating this formula, because it is kind of complicated, and I've said in the past that they usually evaluate inside to the outside, but in this case it starts with an if statement, so it has to evaluate if it's true or false. So in this case it actually starts outside and works in. And let me just show you how that works. There's a function within Excel in the formulas ribbon, and if you come on over here to evaluate formula, whatever cell that you're sitting on, Excel will pop up the formula within it, which is this if statement that we're talking about, and you can actually step through exactly how Excel is figuring this out. So I can say, hey, I want to step into this first thing, and you can see that Excel has underlined the first thing it's going to evaluate. D8. So Excel first says, what's in cell D8? And you step in and it says $210,000 is what it evaluated. You can see it's here. I'm going to step back out, and now it replaced that D8 with $210,000, and now it's moving on to C8. And so we'll step in on that. finds that it's 200,000. So it's going to go through that and says, all right, now here's a statement. Here's this if statement. 210, is that greater than 200,000? So if I click evaluate, Excel returns that it says true. So it is greater than $200,000. Perfect. Now the next thing it's talking about is this absolute value, but first it needs to understand what E8 represents. So let's step into that. It says, well, E8, we need to figure out, there's another formula actually behind this. It's C8 minus D8. So it'll step in there, find that amount, step out, step back in, step out. It's really this formula is happening. So it evaluates over here till negative 10,000. So I'm going to evaluate it, negative 10,000 like it shows, step out. And now it's going to say, all right, what's the absolute value of negative $10,000? Evaluate that. Like I was saying, it's going to be positive because the absolute value just flips the signs to make everything positive. It's going to go on to G8, step in real quick. Again, there's a formula behind this cell, if you can actually see it, C8 up here in the top left, C8 times F8. So it needs to find what these reference cells are. So C8, that's going to be 200,000. Step in, 200,000 obviously, perfect. And then step in again, times 10%, step out, evaluate that, 20,000. So we already have that here, but Excel is still going through the motions of evaluating every single thing on or within this formula. So step out, evaluate. Now I'm going to evaluate, is this statement true or false? So evaluate it. It says it's false. So therefore, it's going to evaluate the entire if statement. If this is false, then it's going to say okay. So evaluate it, okay. So if true, say okay, otherwise say no. Evaluate. That's how it turned out to okay. Now if you're ever getting just overwhelmed with why is my formula not evaluating to the value that I was expecting it to evaluate to? I mean, it's happened to me where I'm expecting it to say overspent, but it's coming out and saying okay. I have no idea what's going on, so then I jump into that formulas ribbon and say evaluate my formula. That way I can step through and see exactly where did I go wrong in writing my formula. That button, it's not only used for nested if statements, it can be used for any formula, whether it's a VLOOKUP or if it's just a nested formulas. It doesn't need to be nested if statements. So go ahead and give it a try and start working smarter with if statements.